Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the Water Talk today. My name is Ben Hutchins and I'm part of the marketing team here at Innovise. Our topic today is building with nature, and this is the first in the series of Water Talks that showcase drainage design implementation. Before I introduce our presenters, a quick reminder about how you can get involved and ask questions of our experts. As we run through the slides, simply type your questions into the question box located in the right corner of your GoToWebinar interface. We will not mention your full name when reading your questions, and our experts will provide answers. Please also note that all phone lines are muted during the Water Talk today. Also, please remember you can find today's presentation slides in the handout section of your GoToWebinar interface. The Water Talk is being recorded and we'll share it with you next week. Now let me introduce you to your experts today. Firstly, we are proud to welcome as our special guest, Dr. Gemma Jerome. Gemma is a champion for the functions and benefits of green infrastructure across the built environment and nature conservation sectors. As Director of Building with Nature, she oversees this natural benchmark for green infrastructure, integrating holistic design thinking into planning and development through a new quality standard that ensures we build places that meet the needs of this and future generations. Gemma became a Fellow of the Landscape Institute in 2021. In this role, she champions holistic, joined-up design thinking to find solutions to the triple threat of the climate change, ecological and health emergency. Joining Gemma, we also have Mark Ellis. Mark graduated back in 2007 and has spent his career since working in the software industry. His experience spans the cloud, asset management and the water sector. He joined Innovise in April 2019, having previously worked at a Google Cloud consultancy. He is one of our solution engineers and specializes in the drainage design solution set. Finally, your host today is Peter Coombs. Peter is the EMEA Innovation Manager at Innovise. He is a chartered water and environment manager with 44 years of experience as a civil engineer, covering all aspects of storm and foul water drainage. He has designed, modelled and delivered a range of storm and foul water projects in the UK before moving to the Middle East for 5 years. For the past 19 years, Peter has been with the Innovise Group, specialising in water supply, SUDS design, wastewater hydraulic modelling, flood modelling, asset management and artificial intelligence across EMEA and India. Finally, it would be remiss of me not to congratulate Peter for also being recently shortlisted in the SUDS Champions Awards that celebrate people who have gone the extra mile to deliver and encourage the uptake of SUDS. An excellent achievement there. So that completes our expert lineup for you today. Let's start the show. Peter, over to you.
Many thanks, Ben, and welcome everybody. Welcome, Gemma. It's lovely to have you all on board on this glorious sunny day. So thanks for bearing with us on such a beautiful day. Here's the prompt on popping your questions into the question box. So do feel free to list those questions as we go through the presentation. And if we move on to the next slide, I think the first thing we'll do is, after introducing ourselves as we have a look at the first poll, Ben, and see who's online today. So if we launch the first poll, just find out what kind of company you're working for. Are you working for a local authority, consultancy, developer, etc.? Be really good to know who's attending today. And what we'll do is when we get a good number of people that have voted, we'll close it. Very good. We've got over 70% have voted already. In the background here, I can see like a little bar chart, and it's like can be a little race going on sometimes, but there's a clear winner here today so far. Give it another couple of seconds until we're over 80%. There we go. Thanks, Ben. So as we can see, that we've got 61% of the audience are consultants. So you guys will all be designing sustainable drainage systems, etc. So this is really relevant to what I'd like you to aspire towards with your great green infrastructure designs. And we've got 21% from local authorities, 8% from water companies, and 1% from the developers. So welcome one and all. Thanks for that. I think we've got another poll actually, Ben, just to run through, and then I'll do a couple of slides and hand over to Gemma. So yeah, the question is a simple yes or no. Had you heard of Building with Nature before this water talk? I'm thinking Building with Nature sort of specification. So again, it's great that everyone's actively engaging. I can see you've got 70% have voted. So we'll give it another few seconds and then we'll close that one as well. Super. Thanks, Ben. So to me, that's kind of great because 65% of the audience have not heard of Building with Nature before, and this is the whole purpose of why we run our talks. This is a new series called The Implementation of SUDS. So we're trying to bring you things that you may not have heard of to help you do things better in the future. So perfect. Thank you, Ben. Thanks everyone for participating. And without further ado, I'll move on to the introductory slides. And just to sort of put things into context before I hand over to Gemma, what are the main drivers that are driving through the blue-green infrastructure agenda? And we can go back to the Natural Capital Committee, and these guys were formed actually a decade ago. And what happened is in November of 2020, so not that long ago, they published a report, and it was their first report on their long-term 25-year environmental plan. So it was essentially like a progress report on how we're doing. Now, we're not doing awfully well, I would say, is a bit of a synopsis, and therefore that's gone through to government. And now what's happening is that things are starting to be implemented through government and driving this agenda further forward. So this isn't something that's going to go away, but natural capital is absolutely crucial. Thanks, Gemma. In this first publication, they did say that we would be the first generation to leave the environment in a better condition than we found it. That's one of the sort of clear objectives. And so if we come a little bit nearer in time, we're up to now February of this year, looking at the Dasgupta review. I mention this because the economics of biodiversity is the first time that such a study has been carried out in such depth. And this review is kind of like the Stern review that came out on climate change. And we're all very familiar with the climate change agenda nowadays, but we're not necessarily so familiar with the natural capital and the biodiversity agenda. And I'm just putting this into context because I honestly believe if I'm talking again in 10 years' time, I'll be referring back to the sort of change in direction, if you like, with the Dasgupta review and a real taking on board of these measures. At the end of the day, what we're saying here is if you don't have a healthy biodiversity, you don't have a healthy economy, you don't have healthy citizens, you don't have a healthy environment, you don't have a healthy economy, it's not sustainable. So we've got to improve biodiversity, and that, again, is feeding through the agenda. Thanks, Gemma. So following the February report from Dasgupta, in March, we had the Build Back Better publication that came out from Her Majesty's Treasury. So this is published on the 3rd of March. And within this, there's a 10-point plan. And the idea is it's going to encompass the whole country. So we're trying to reunite and level up the country. This isn't a political statement. This is like the facts end of the publication. But in there, it mentions the green industrial revolution. So it's another factor driving what we're talking about here today. And the language from that earlier committee report and document that came out a decade ago is coming off of Rishi Sunak's lips, the first generation to leave the environment in a better condition than we found it. So this is really starting to drive through in everything that we're legislating for. So if we move on to the next slide, Gemma. Just ourselves, we've created a 5-minute video on blue-green infrastructure. We'll share the link with this if we can maybe pop that in the handout, or if not, we'll email it to you. So there's a 5-minute introduction to blue-green infrastructure, and specifically how we can do things better at an early stage of the planning process, and look at water, for example, as an asset rather than just being a flooding type threat. We need to look at water as being an asset and working with it and having it at the heart of our developments. And on to the final slide, Ben. What's coming up in the autumn is the Environment Bill 2021 is currently going through the Lords, and within the bill there are a number of environmental targets, and there is a new body being set up. There's an interim body that's being set up now, and it's called the Office of Environmental Protection. And a webinar would not be a webinar without another acronym. So apologies everyone, but if you see OEP, then that's the Office of Environmental Protection. So there will be stronger drivers and measures to punish people that are adversely affecting the environment. So I'm thinking CSO spills, I'm thinking, you know, all manner of things that people could be prosecuted for. So for me, it's great that you've actually got the legislation coming through on something that we've been passionate about at Innovise for quite some time now, and the blue-green infrastructure is something that we need to aspire for, and it's something that's really come to mind in the last 15 months that we've gone through, the importance of being close to nature, etc. But today we're going to talk not just about how to design things better and get them approved with Gemma's system, but also building them correctly is really important, and absolutely passionate about the idea of the ongoing management and the maintenance of these items as well, to make sure they're fit for purpose for future generations. So that's my introduction, and without further ado, I will hand over to you, Gemma. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, sorry. The brightness of sunshine, it's very confusing at the moment, and also working from home, it just feels like the days run into each other. But this is great. That one advantage is we all get to be in the same room, and these webinars make it really exciting for me because I'm getting to meet a much wider cross-section of professionals than I can usually manage in my schedule by running around the country going to speaker engagements. So thank you so much to Peter, to Innovise, and to Ben for putting this webinar on. So I'm going to spend the next half an hour talking to you about green infrastructure. Now, I love that you said in your introduction, Peter, that we need to think about water as an asset, because that is really, if I could capture what we are interested in from a green infrastructure benchmark point of view at Building with Nature, it's doing just that. It's changing the storyline. So instead of water being something that engineers, hydrologists, and other professionals engaged in the planning and development sector are seeing as a constraint on development, it's actually switching that, so we start to see water as an asset, and more generally nature as an asset. So for those who, I'm sure there's no one here who is new to the concept of green infrastructure, but just so we're all on the same page, Building with Nature is a benchmark for green infrastructure. It's a national benchmark which sets the standard. So basically we're saying this might be the baseline at the moment, but we want this to be the baseline. And actually, it's not about doing extra. It's sometimes about doing things at the right time, and it's about having the right people around the table asking questions at the right time. So we're here to talk about how we do that from a sustainable drainage point of view, and I'm going to talk initially about the benchmark as a whole, but I am going to give more focus to the water standards as well. I am going to move on to the next slide. I'm just conscious that I can see myself talking over there and it's a little bit distracting, but I'll just carry on, and I'm sure it's not affecting you. Okay, so I've set myself a timer. We're going to canter through these slides, and I'm going to make sure there's enough time at the end to pick up your questions, because I'm really interested in hearing, especially because 65% of you are hearing about Building with Nature for the first time. So I hope I can cover all the basics, but you might have more technical questions for me, which I'm more than happy to be able to be given the chance to answer later. Okay, so UK's first benchmark for green infrastructure. There's a couple of things wrapped into that one short statement. UK, these standards can be used across the UK. So there are actually quite different policy and legislative frameworks for water management and green infrastructure more generally across England, Scotland and Wales, but we wanted to create a set of standards which could be equally applicable across the whole of the UK. Let's keep it simple. Yes, we have policy that's very national, that's also, we have local policy, but let's actually create some design principles which get us in a better place, and also means that if we are bringing together a multidisciplinary design team, they can all understand, because the Building with Nature standards are drawing on sustainable drainage, ecology, planning, landscape architecture. So there's so many, and architects in the built environment sector has so many professionals driving forward quality. We wanted something that would be useful for all of those professionals to make the best decisions around placemaking. So it's UK-wide. It's the first benchmark of its type because it's interested in green infrastructure through the whole life cycle, and also every type and scale of green infrastructure. So I'll quickly say something on that. When we talk about the whole life cycle, it's as Peter said, yes, we're interested in high quality design, and especially how that feeds into bringing forward a really strong master plan and making sure we get planning approval for schemes which are going to deliver those functions and benefits. This isn't a proxy for the planning system. That's the function of the planning system. However, we all know that quality can deteriorate from the journey from planning approval to implementation. So we're as focused on construction and implementation as we are on design. How do we ensure that that quality doesn't deteriorate? And having a benchmark, and we'll talk a little bit about accreditation, having a formal accreditation system that can follow a development through is really key to doing that. The final stage being, yes, so we get the construction team on board, and we've got a really high quality implementation where features are actually implemented so that they're functional. That would be a good start. And then beyond that, how do we actually give any reassurance to the wide set of stakeholders who are invested in good development coming forward that those functions and benefits will be deliverable in the long term? And that's about long-term management, maintenance, monitoring and remediation. So the benchmark is also interested in that stage, and we have a technical user guide to support people to use the standards and interpret the standards at each of those stages. So that's the whole life cycle. And then the last thing to say is we have other assessment and accreditation systems out there. We know that a big part of bringing forward a green infrastructure benchmark, and it would be remiss of me not to mention this because I realise that one of the frustrations in the sector is, oh, another thing, aren't we just duplicating what we already have over here? The point of Building with Nature, we were funded with innovation funding from government, and subsequently the Natural Environment Research Council funded the development of this benchmark. They were very clear that this had to be bringing forward something new, something that filled a gap in the market, and the gap we found was a quality standard for all types of green infrastructure. So if we take something like the Green Flag Award, that's primarily for parks and green spaces. If we take something like BREEAM, that's primarily for buildings. If we take something like Building for Life, that's the whole development, but it's a self-certification mechanism. So Building with Nature fills all of those gaps by being applicable to everything from the individual feature to the whole network of features at a landscape scale. And we offer a formal accreditation to be able to say that somebody independent has approved the quality of this particular scheme. Okay, so that's the basics of Building with Nature. It's a framework of standards underpinned by a benchmark and an accreditation system, but the standards themselves are free to use. And given that the standards are free to use, it's really important to us that we have credibility in the sector. So we developed the standards initially with partners from academia and testing the standards live on planning applications and development on the ground. So we're confident that these standards are pragmatic and practical enough that they work, they do what we need them to do, but they're also robust enough and evidence-based. And to continue that, we have a standards board. So you can see, I won't read through all the logos on the slide here, but you can see who's involved in giving credibility and robustness to our system. And it's a range of government representatives, professional bodies and key agencies, and that gives us some reassurance that it's not just Building with Nature as a charitable organisation saying that these standards represent high quality. We also have all of these key players from the green infrastructure sector feeding into that as well. You'll notice Environment Agency on there as well, so we have some expertise in terms of strategic and site-based water management feeding in as well as making sure that it works from a commercial point of view. So we have developers, Taylor Wimpey, Nick Rogers, who's the design director, sits on our standards board. It's fantastic to have that, to have that regular check that what we're asking for is practicable and actually has value. So it's that question of, well, why would people want to use this? Why would a client, a developer, as a consultant, how do you sell in this as an additional approach? So it's important that we communicate to you that you understand this isn't just an academic tool, even though it's underpinned by that evidence. It's actually a tool that works in the market as well. Okay, so the key thing to understand about Building with Nature is it's all about quality. We have other systems and other mechanisms to focus on the what. So a very topical, and Peter mentioned it in his introduction, a very topical conversation is around biodiversity net gain, that there is a metric-based approach that is emergent in England. So that's also important to understand. That isn't the preferred approach in Scotland and Wales as yet. But in England, we are being encouraged to take a very quantitative metric-led approach to understanding what we need to do in terms of biodiversity gains. So how do we enhance and create more biodiversity in the right places? So that's what BNG can help with. Building with Nature is not duplicating that approach. It sits alongside and is complementary, because if we say biodiversity net gain is the what, then Building with Nature is the how. So for the same point of view, we can think about water management. All of your existing methodologies and calculations as to what would be appropriate in terms of sustainable water management within the boundary of a site, that still stands. But the how is how to integrate that as a design solution that then gives you your multifunctional benefits. So how can you actually design in above ground surface water management features which are not only managing your water quantity and water quality, but are also bringing you benefits for people and wildlife. So Building with Nature is a quality standard, and it's addressing that through creating holistic design principles that can be applied at each stage of the planning and development process. Okay. This slide is to give you a really strong message that we're doing it. We did develop Building with Nature back in 2015, and since then we have been working to roll it out across the UK. So we actually initially intended to create a benchmark just for one area. So this started in Gloucestershire, and quite quickly we realised that there was a gap more generally for a national benchmark and an accreditation system which worked for the whole of green infrastructure in planning and development. So we switched to creating a national benchmark. We launched that in 2018, and we have been busy since then working on the ground with developers, their design professionals, consultants and planning authorities to make this the preferred standards framework for green infrastructure, and also where appropriate to encourage people to pursue formal accreditation. So we've got over 50 schemes from Central Scotland to Cornwall using Building with Nature. We have the Building with Nature standards framework, which are free to use and can be downloaded from our website. So people are downloading that every week. We have a network of 100 assessors. So they're the people who are qualified to apply the standards in practice if your client is pursuing formal accreditation, either for their own reasons because they want to be able to tell the story and add value and commercial benefit to the scheme, or because the local authority is asking them and there's a requirement to achieve Building with Nature accreditation. We have examples of both those in our portfolio. So there's 6 training courses online for people to become approved assessors. The majority of people who become assessors are from one of the green infrastructure disciplines, so landscape architecture, ecology, sustainable drainage, or planning. So that would apply to, I imagine, most people on this webinar. And we also are in 2 weeks, sorry, no, the 23rd is next week, isn't it? We are launching our green infrastructure training product for local authorities too. So that's really exciting, and that's happening. And that's where we support local authorities to better understand how to integrate our principles into your work. Okay, I am going to speed up because I'm conscious of time, but it's really good to be able to tell you, give you a kind of real reassurance about the underpinnings of buildable nature. So now there's a couple of slides where I'm going to talk to you about when we talk about green infrastructure and having a benchmark for green infrastructure, why is that important? So Peter has covered some of this, so I'll be able to move more quickly through these slides, but it's key. From a buildable nature point of view, we talk about the three emergencies, a triple threat of the climate emergency, the ecological emergency, and the health emergency, which we're now all in the middle of. And green infrastructure can help address and tackle and create design solutions for all three. And part of using the standards is to better understand how to do that. So from a climate point of view, we're interested in mitigation, adaptation, and supporting climate positive behaviours. So an example of mitigation is actually reducing carbon that's already in the atmosphere as a way of mitigating some of the impacts, the negative impacts from that. So for example, having high temperatures in towns and cities has big impacts not only on people's health and well-being, especially vulnerable people, but even in terms of the efficiency of how our systems can operate. So having green infrastructure to help with urban cooling is key. Also, different species can help sequester carbon. So that's an example of mitigation. Adaptation is about responding to the carbon that's already in the atmosphere. And sustainable drainage is one of the key ways we can do that, because as we get more unpredictable weather patterns and flood and drought, we need sustainable drainage to be key in our approach to water management. And I don't need to tell you that. That's partly why you're here, because you understand that. And then in terms of climate positive behaviours, it's about once we introduce all of that green infrastructure, we can't just expect that people will use it. We actually need to encourage and support people to use it. So it's not just about build it and they will come. It's about how we actually promote, for example, modal shift. So we know that a key part of tackling the climate emergency is getting people out of their cars and walking and cycling. But by creating a really good pathway network, just doing that alone isn't enough. That's why green infrastructure can help. People are more likely to want to walk and cycle if it's a really attractive, safe, green route. And that's what all the evidence is showing us. So that's the kind of thing we're interested in. The ecological emergency is about making space for nature. We can use the new legislative environment to help us do that. The Environment Bill is talking about nature recovery networks, local nature recovery strategies, and also connectivity is key as well. So there's really key principles in terms of building that into your design thinking, which the standards can help you with. And then the health emergency. It's incredibly important that we recognise there is an inequity of access of green infrastructure. So when we are bringing forward a new development, we really need to push back. From a building in nature point of view, this is really key to people understanding what high quality green infrastructure means. It's not enough to just deliver green infrastructure for people who can afford to be next to it. We need everybody to have access to high quality green infrastructure. And that has a really important message in terms of helping as a consultant, helping your client to make a design more likely to achieve planning approval. We know that most local authorities now have really clear local plan policies and targets around reducing health and social inequalities. So green infrastructure is one of the ways we can actually bring forward better quality development to do that. I'm happy to talk more about any of these principles in the discussion, but I do want to move through these slides. Peter really clearly talked about the agenda around building back better. Green infrastructure is key to quality placemaking, and actually recognizing that green infrastructure is not a nice to have. This is the really strong message of Building with Nature. It's called infrastructure for a reason, because actually it's essential to some of the things that make places livable. So whether it's clean air, clean water, or actually cost-effective ways of managing risks around flood, for example, we need to help our clients understand that. Okay, the standards themselves. So the standards framework, I'm going to move through the standards quite quickly, but please download the standards framework and have a read so you better understand how rich the standards are in terms of helping you frame your design thinking. But as a high level framing, we're talking here about high quality placemaking and green infrastructure underpinning that. And the key ingredients to high quality placemaking can be simply expressed with these three words. It's about well-being, it's about water, it's about wildlife. That's how green infrastructure can help with placemaking. And the standards cover off how we help to secure health and wellbeing outcomes through green infrastructure. I've talked about accessibility and inclusivity, but also place distinctiveness. From a water point of view, which is what we are interested in more so today, we talk about, we essentially take the framing of the CIRIA 4 pillars in the CIRIA SUDS manual: quantity, quality, amenity and biodiversity. We group the final 2 together. So they're the 3 key objectives of the water standards. And it's, as Peter said, it's about seeing water as an asset. So I'm going to move through to, these are the standards wording. So we have 6 standards at the moment around water, and they focus on those drivers of quality, which is, are you using above ground surface water, soft landscaping, essentially green infrastructure, to, where possible, exploit the opportunity to use green infrastructure to manage surface water and to manage water across the site, to retain, for example, existing water features. So we're trying to guide a context-led approach. So that's another key thing with Building with Nature. The design solution is always driven by the context. You know that. But there are design principles which need to frame the parameters within which you're working, so you don't overlook some of what is essentially should be the basics, so the framework that sits underneath that context-led, site-driven design. So the user guide then, which you can download the standards framework and get access to these standards, but then when you work with an approved assessor to follow a Building with Nature accreditation, what we give you in the technical user guide is an understanding about why that standard is important, illustrative examples. So for example, this is the illustrative examples that sit behind Water 1, which is about water quantity, and what we're showing here, that is in Building with Nature terms, sustainable drainage is a whole range of features, everything from the very kind of small features right up to the consideration of the landscape scale. So it's making sure that we all understand the range, the kind of menu of options that we're encompassing when we talk about sustainable drainage. So the components that green infrastructure can be integral to. Then we have an evidence of compliance section that enables the assessor to understand what evidence we'd be looking for. If you were the assessor, for example, and the client charged you with, not only do I want you to design my sustainable drainage scheme, I want you to help me achieve Building with Nature accreditation, we give you guidance as to what evidence we'd be looking for. And then we also have signposts out. Now, the key thing, you're probably thinking, well, I already use the SUDS manual. That's great. The point is, Building with Nature is not going to reinvent the wheel. CIRIA have done a fantastic job at creating a very comprehensive document which they take charge of keeping up to date and in line with the latest understanding from industry good practice, and also taking into account legislative and policy context. We're just going to say, use that. So a lot of Building with Nature is signposting out to other guidance, whether that's British standards, something like the SUDS manual, or other green infrastructure related documentation, but it's about pulling that all together into one place. So the standards and the user guide become like a one-stop shop for understanding what you need to take into account for green infrastructure. Also, that means as an assessor, you don't need to be an expert in all of those disciplines. So you might be an expert in water and engineering, and of course you're going to find demonstrating compliance with the water standards easy because you know what you're looking for. But for ecology and the well-being, you might feel, I'm going to have to learn a bit more about this. But the point is, the assessor is there to ask the design team the right questions. And also a key thing to understand about Building with Nature, and we're going to move on to looking at accreditation and what's involved in that, is that it's not asking the design team or your client to do anything extra. If they're committed to delivering a high quality scheme, it's about just pulling that evidence together into one place for the assessor to be able to assess it, and for Building with Nature to be able to assess the assessor's work and award that scheme. Does that make sense? So what the key message here is, this isn't about doing anything extra. It's about being able to demonstrate what you've done. And that can be really beneficial, not just to be able to tell the story about your development, but also then to reassure those other key stakeholders like the planning officers or even the elected members that you've done what you've said you've done. It's not just you saying it. and let's face it, planning officers need as much support as they can, and we want to support planning departments to more effectively make good development management decisions. So there's two sides to this coin. Okay, this is a little snapshot of the new standards which are launching tomorrow, and Peter said it's very exciting that we're having this webinar today because it's a big day for us tomorrow. What that means is periodically we take another look at the standards, because as Peter's slides at the beginning showed us, new legislation, new policy coming out all the time. This is a really exciting time for us. We're getting new environmental policy for the first time in years. So we have taken, the last year, we've taken that time with the Standards Board to look at our standards that we've been using since 2018 and just check they're still doing what we need to do. The great news is the answer was yes. We just added a few extra standards, but we've reorganized and restructured. So instead of having 23 standards, we've now got 12. And it's also given us a good moment to give more emphasis. So for example, we've given more guidance around what is meant by climate change response, and also more guidance around long-term management and maintenance. So the water standards, the content is the same, but we've added a couple of new core standards which actually help the water standards to be more effective. So you'll be able to download this from our website from tomorrow. This is just a little snapshot of what the water standards now say. So there's now 2 water standards. We've also taken away good and excellent, because we feel that if you've achieved a Building with Nature award, if you're using the Building with Nature standards, it's already a great scheme. So let's just say it's a Building with Nature scheme. So we have Standard 9, which is about delivering climate resilient water management. That's about water quantity and water quality. And then we have standard 10, which is about the amenity and biodiversity benefits. So we now just have these 2 key standards. It makes it easier to evidence. It makes it easier to sell in to your client as well, that these are the 2 key areas we're looking for. And then because Building with Nature standards work as a set, the long-term management, maintenance and monitoring of your SUDS features, of your water features, are integral, because you've followed the standard that relates to long-term management and maintenance. Okay, there is also wildlife standards. I think I've said quite a lot about this already, and I'm conscious I've only got another 6 minutes, so I'll just say the key message is, for those of you who are thinking about biodiversity net gain, especially local authorities on the line, you have to do biodiversity net gain in England as a mandatory requirement, and that has its own accreditation process. We're not duplicating that. Building with Nature is about quality, and also it's about on-site, whereas we are fully anticipating that some developers will prefer to deliver their biodiversity gains off-site. Because Building with Nature is about green infrastructure and placemaking, we're looking for those SUDS features and those habitat features to be on site so they can benefit people and wildlife. You've got this slide pack, so anything it feels like I'm skipping over, you can go back to. Let's say something about accreditation. So you can use the standards, they're free to use, and you get the standards wording, and that's great. You can have those on your desk. You know that can really improve your approach to design or your approach to policy making. However, if you want that external verification that you have actually followed the standards, and you're getting there's an independent verification that you've done that, then that's what accreditation and award is for. So accreditation explains the whole journey, that you have an assessment and an audit stage within that journey, and then if you're successful, the end output is an award. So there are different types of award. There is the Building with Nature Design Award, which is for outline schemes. So when all we can see is a design, like an outline planning application, I know not every scheme has an outline, but for those larger schemes that do, it's good to be able to say the design is showing that there is a high quality of green infrastructure coming forward. And for those really strategic size schemes, that's really great, because that gives reassurance to, again, a whole range of stakeholders, the planning authority, elected members, and maybe also communities who might object to development. You can say, look, this isn't just any old development, we're actually delivering high quality development here, and we've got this external verification to say so. Then we've got the full award. So the full award is for schemes where we can see the detailed designs, and it also importantly includes a post-construction check. So that's where we come back and check what you've actually implemented. And we all know how important that is. And it's the only accreditation system that currently does this. So we come back 12 months post completion of that phase, and we compare what we've highlighted as being important for the quality of green infrastructure, and that will include all of the elements that relate to water management. We actually check that they're functioning, because I feel, you know, over the years of developing and designing this, working with planning with design professionals and even developers and house builders themselves, we've heard lots of stories about, you know, the sustainable drainage features were not implemented flush, and the levels weren't right, and we had silting, and it wasn't being managed and maintained. So 12 months after completion, it wasn't actually functional. There's so many stories like that. So we wanted to make sure that our system took that into account. So we don't set specific time periods of management maintenance, but we do look at the context of that scheme, and we give guidelines around that. So we're fully anticipating, and we check that you have the right model and mechanism and resources in place for management and maintenance. So in that sense, it's a process standard. Once that 12 month post-construction check has been signed off, there isn't then an ongoing check, but what we check for is that there is a body in place which does that ongoing check. So that's the difference. We also have a policy award, so we have examples of local plans, SPDs, GI strategies, getting the policy actually accredited with the Building in Nature standards. That means those principles of good practice are built in. And we also have the National Award, which is available for physical development that is built out and wishes to get that extra level of recognition. They're delivered as part of the Landscape Institute Awards annually, and last year's winner was the Forth Valley Royal Hospital and Larbert Woods development in Scotland, and it's a fantastic example. You can see the case study on our website, because a key message here is Building in Nature is not just for residential development, it's for infrastructure, community infrastructure and commercial development as well. Okay, how are we doing for time? I think I probably will just run to the end to give you a little announcement. We have a great document you can download from a website, which is benefits to developers, in case you're looking to really sell this in to your consultancy services. You might be thinking about becoming an approved assessor. You might be, you might be the GI champion in the design team, and we have a document to help you make that case. But the key message here is having a shared framework of standards between the applicant and the planning officer can really help smooth the passage through planning. And also the key thing is we're offering you practical ideas about how to secure good implementation, how to secure good management and maintenance. I'll skip that slide. Okay, key moments. I'll finish on this, Peter, and then we should give some a good amount of time for questions. Key moments coming this year. As I've said, we are launching standards, BWN Standards Framework 2.0 tomorrow. So look out, go to our website, you'll be able to download the standards framework from there from tomorrow. The key thing there being there's now 12 standards, so it's easier to evidence if you're thinking about becoming an approved assessor, makes your job easier. But they're still as robust as ever, so from a local authority point of view, they are still the national benchmark for high quality green infrastructure. In fact, it goes in our favour because more people are more likely to use a system that isn't perceived as overly complex, and also considering 230 councils have declared a climate emergency, we really need to make good on that commitment. So the standards are also have been enhanced, improved to offer more ideas about how to address climate change, and also the ongoing perennial issue of long-term management and maintenance. We wanted to give the sector even more support as to what good management and maintenance looks like. So that's now in the new standards framework. That's going to be available from tomorrow. And then for those who work in England, I just wanted to flag that we know that Natural England are creating some green infrastructure standards and a GI guide, and we are working with them in partnership to make sure our standards align with their standards. So again, it's not a frustration to the sector. We're actually all working together. So the message there is that we know National Model Design Code has got a lot to say about green infrastructure, and for those local authorities especially who are awaiting, anticipating what those design codes will mean for local coding. We want Building with Nature standards to be a tool that kind of gets you going. So rather than starting from scratch, use the Building with Nature standards framework as a good indication of what good looks like locally, and then make it work for your local context. Okay, right. I am going to stop there, and I've got a couple of slides that I need to pass on to. So let me just move through. Oh, I'm going to skip the case study, but there is a case study for you to look at, and I'm happy for anyone to contact me after. There's my email in case anybody wants to jot that down. I will put it in the chat as well, because and that's our website as well. And then over to you, Peter.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gemma. That was great. You might want to leave up the web address there, Gemma.
Great.
There we go, because that's a nice one for people to be able to sort of refer to, and I'd encourage everyone to go visit, and across the board there, hopefully we can get more people like signing up and implementing it for you. And what we'll do, that was a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed it, Gemma. Very engaging. Got lots of questions that are coming through. Should we ask the last poll question, Ben, and then I'll go through the questions? There you go. Thank you very much. So now, would you now consider using the Building with Nature standards? Yes, no, maybe so. Don't know. So that's great. That'll be good to hear. Bearing in mind that 60% rather of the audience had not heard of it at all before the start of the meeting. This would be really interesting. So 60% have voted. If we just ask you to vote, if you don't know, you can say don't know, but encourage to get over the 75% mark. We're just creeped up to the 70% mark, so we'll close the poll when we get to 75%. Sorry to be a stickler, but really important to get the feedback and see where we're at. Lovely. I don't think that's going to change much more now, Ben. So thanks for that, folks. And there we go. 54% definite yes. We'll now consider using it. So credit to you, Gemma. Thank you very much indeed. If we close that, Ben, we can leave the background slide. If you go back one, Gemma, we can have your email website address up. There we go, and then people can go and engage with it. So thanks, folks. That was really nice feedback. I'll just go through the questions now, Gemma. We've got Naomi noticing that the environment agencies for Wales and Northern Ireland and SEPA are not listed on the standards board. Have they had any input into the standards at all? Oh, I think you're muted, Gemma.
Always a good start, isn't it? I'll be the one to get that wrong. Really great question, Naomi. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So we are working. The standards board is kind of like a snapshot of who is around the table in those decisions each time. However, I can reassure you that we have an approved assessor who sits in SEPA. So Wendy Campbell, who works for SEPA, is an approved assessor. We also are talking to Natural Resource Wales really closely. They fed into the standards review. The short answer to your question is they are on board. They just don't currently have a representative on the standards board. So we absolutely understand the different approaches in Scotland and Wales, and that's all integral to what our user guide is supporting professionals to do in the areas that they're working in. Yeah.
Great. And the thought that came to my mind, Gemma, whilst you were talking in the presentation about the local authorities, that there are quite a few, the lead local flood authorities and the sort of SUDS officers now have something called like a SUDS pro forma. I'm just wondering, have you managed to sort of talk to the lead local flood authorities at all, or the local government association, to see if maybe Building with Nature as a process or a standard could be introduced into their pro formas? In other words, encourage more people to engage with it early in the process?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a really good point, and we'd love to be able to kind of roll that out as a standard approach. The where we're at with that at the moment is I think it's fair to say, Peter, is that we are working on a case by case basis with local authorities. So we had, as I mentioned, I think I briefly mentioned, so maybe people didn't log it, but the local authority green infrastructure training that launches next week. We developed that, thank you to funding from Esme Fairbairn Foundation, meant that we could actually test that with a pilot, with a set of pilot local authorities. That has given us really good feedback around, there is a slight variation of approaches. However, local lead for the authorities is key, and so that's now been built into the local authority training and what we are able to support as a more standard approach. So the resources that we're developing will reflect that, Peter. And also local government association, we're working with them to be able to offer those resources to as many local authorities as possible. Yeah.
Great. Lovely. Thanks for that. One from Cabrindra. I'll just go through all the questions in sequence. So very nice presentation, Dr. Gemma. Back that one up, Cabrindra. Thank you for making community WASH resilient, WASH resilient. Do you have special indicators to measure how the community is resilient on integrated water?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Good one.
Yeah. So what I would say is that we have a standard within the standards framework, which it gives more detail and nuance around community, the quality of not just, let's face it, so much of focus on community engagement is at the planning stage, but it's that ongoing engagement. So the standard that talks about what role the community will have ongoing is more in line with what you're talking about. What I would say, given we don't have a huge amount of time, I'd love to have a further conversation with you about that, because we're in the process of updating our user guide, and it might be that you could bring something to our table that makes sure we more, we have as much detail around that as we need to have in our user guide. So please take a note of my email and get in touch, is what I'd say.
Lovely. Thanks, Gemma. James is asking, you mentioned there are many instances of drainage systems silting up and not functioning after construction. Can you expand on this, and how often does it happen? What are the issues and what's done about it?
Okay, so in our guidance, we focus on the process. So we have examples, not within our case studies, because obviously our case studies have been awarded because they have mechanisms or procedures in place to avoid this happening. But there will be instances where this happens, and we have examples which are fed into why our standards say what they say. But in terms of expanding on that point, our key finding is that there is the way I kind of think of it conceptually is because, sorry, I've got a little prop here. So this highlighter, this is like the planning application. It's like a baton that gets passed. So, or this is the design, if you like. And as it gets passed, different things are interpreted more or less effectively. So the key problem, I would say, as a quick response to your question, because I think that's a whole kind of workshop in itself, is that the plans that are brought forward in terms of having a functional, high quality, sustainable drainage system are not interpreted correctly by the contractors who are in charge of implementation and construction. And that then so I gave the quick example of, we had one where features were not implemented in a way that actually made the management and maintenance possible. So if a feature isn't flush with the right ground levels, when you're coming along to mow that area, you can't, because there's the actual structure of that system means it's prohibitive to you being able to manage and maintain it, which then means it's overlooked in management and maintenance, and over time that then results in the system not being functional. So what we try and do is support the assessor to in turn support the design team to head those likelihoods off at the pass. And part of that, and I'll just finish with this because I think there's a really interesting conversation that needs a little bit more time to discuss, and that's what we would do in the assessor training or in the training for local authorities. But there's something about having the right people around the table at the same time. So one thing I found interesting when we were developing Builder in Nature is the feedback from the sector is sometimes when the Builder in Nature assessment is in train, when that is happening, you need all of the design professionals around the table. So you need the SUDS engineers, the hydrologists, the landscape architects, the ecologists, the master planners, the urban designers, all together to understand what the commitment is to achieving that benchmark. And sometimes that's the only time that all of those design professionals are in the room at the same time. Now, I hope that lots of you on the call are going, well, no, we do that all the time. That's not unusual. That's good practice. But there is definitely a whole host of development where that's not happening. And I think that's why we end up with issues that not everybody is bought in. And then there's also the stages. So if the construction professionals are not bought into achieving a certain quality, somebody without the right skills is implementing a scheme. And anyway, I think you know where I'm going with this. It's making sure, we're there as an extra layer of enforcement of quality as well. And that's another way to think about it from a planning point of view.
Yeah, so it's another thread of compliance, isn't it, going right the way through the whole life cycle. And I think
Exactly.
I really think that's been missing. And I think that's probably been the problem, James, is that there's often been sites that have been handed over to sort of private management contractors. Maybe they've changed hands from one to another, and the maintenance plans haven't been like slickly passed over. So that's great. And on the subject of construction as well, Naomi is asking, she does a lot of work with developers on construction phase SUDS. Do the building with nature standards include the construction phase?
Yes, short answer to that is yes. So if you are pursuing a full award, for example, you absolutely would need to show us evidence around the documents will be called different things on different projects or in different parts of the UK, but for example, a SEMP, we would want to see the actual arrangements around construction. And also, this is why I mentioned before about having Nick Rogers on the standards board. It's been really useful to get that really practical feedback about what you can expect at different stages of a project. So in a full award, for example, not everything that we need to assess, let's take SUDS as an example, will be ready at a full planning application stage. It will be later when those the contract arrangements are in place. So we would use that as evidence in the Builder in Nature accreditation. But from a standards point of view, which is the other side, 'cause you might not pursue accreditation, Naomi, is that the standards talk about every stage of development. So it's implicit that construction is a key stage in actually delivering high quality, yes.
Great. I'm going to keep going. I know we're going to run a little bit late, folks, but we are making a recording of this, and I think there's such good questions. I'd love to have Gemma and pick your brains now, if you won't mind, for another 5 minutes, and then we can sort of can the recording so we can share it with everyone. I'll just ask one from Rob Forsyth. Rob, thanks. What's the key difference from CE equal?
CEQUAL, yeah.
With nature.
Yeah, okay. So what we find is it's a great question. We've got a whole paper on this for anyone who really wants to geek out. We did a kind of a full evaluation of all the other tools and what they do and what they don't do, and then that was the benefit of working with an academic team for the first 2.5 years of product development. However, the short answer to your question is CEQUAL is focus on different types of projects at different scales, and also it's much more geared towards commercial development. So we have taken on board what's great about CEQUAL, but then we've brought forward different elements to the initiative, to the system itself. So please have a look for some. We do have some of our published papers out there which kind of prove where we're coming from. But the short answer is that we feel like Builder in Nature is, one, it's simpler because for example, we worked with Cornwall Council recently who were tasked with using SQL to evaluate the delivery of small green infrastructure sites across the county. So it was European funded projects. They suggested SQL. In practice, SQL didn't work well at that scale and that type of, so it was about improving existing green infrastructure features, so parks, green spaces, cemeteries, to have more biodiversity value. That's a little kind of probably too much detail, but SQL didn't work well for that type of scheme. So, but Builder in Nature works really well for that type and scale of scheme. So that's a quick answer. Sorry, Rob, I hope that helps.
Thanks for the question, Rob. Thanks for the answer, Gemma. Here's an absolute doozy of a question from Stephen. It's a long read. So good luck. So most of our local authorities' historical ditches are remaining unmaintained due to ecological legislation. So increasing these sorts of assets would surely mean a relaxation in the laws surrounding the environment to secure access for future maintenance via actual permitting and digging and dredging tasks. That's the first kind of part. So a little bit of not exactly a conflict, but
yeah,
we need to be mindful of that. Do you want to sort of come back on that one at all, Gemma?
Yeah, I guess the way I would respond to that is that Builder in Nature is not a prescriptive tool. So what works, I mean, I don't know what local authority area you're from and whether you feel like what's limiting you is a national kind of policy guidance or something more local. But so you talked about environmental legislation being the reason that you're doing what you're doing locally. But my understanding is you can, to a greater or lesser extent, and increasingly so, given the direction of travel across the UK in terms of local authorities being more empowered to decide on the direction of travel around planning, including green infrastructure, is that you can decide what your priorities are and have typologies that work for you. So I think this is, you know, I can answer with some broad principles that relate to Builder in Nature, but it sounds a little bit like a conversation to take offline because it might be very specific to what the opportunities and constraints are within that local plan area. But Builder in Nature is a set of standards which, when you look at the standards, in case people are here now and they haven't even looked at the standards, which is completely understandable, once you look at them, you get a real sense of what the flavour of what we're doing is, and it's about high-level principles which can be used, adopted and adapted to work for your local context. So the other part of what I might get this wrong, the other part I feel of your question is that there will be tensions between our standards are saying where possible people should have access to sustainable drainage to give that amenity and biodiversity benefit back to people. That all won't always be appropriate. So of course there will be features, like you're saying, you've got features standing and they're offering more of a biodiversity benefit. If that's the priority for those features, we wouldn't contradict that. So when, you know, that's why it's context-led. We're saying that where possible, appropriate, you know, commensurate to the size and the resources available, you know, is it possible that you make your sustainable drainage features functional for both people and wildlife? And the implicit thing there, sorry, I'll finish up because I feel like I'm answering a really long question, really long answer. But the implicit thing there is that we're here to raise the baseline, and without being derogatory to anyone or anyone's projects, there are development schemes out there where the approach to sustainable drainage is to have a kind of crater, with very steep-sided feature, which then creates a very, difficult health and safety response required. And it's not multifunctional. So the principle is multifunctionality where that's appropriate to the site.
And it's a really good point that Stephen raises, because It's a great question, Stephen, and it's multifaceted. But in summary, saying at the end, are we still creating new assets which will encourage an influx of species and habitats that will consequently kind of hinder maintenance in the future without addressing the legalities? And I think, yeah, putting it into context again on a site-by-site, depends on the site, of course, and the size of the site, but yeah, there could be conflicts between the various acts and things like that. But
and I think if I could just quickly come back, Stephen, just a really quick extra bit, which I think your question is really valid and an important question, is that what this is, for me, what this is highlighting, and this is a national issue for the market, for the sector, and part of what Building with Nature is keen to influence as and when we can, is a lack of skills. So too often, management of green infrastructure is a relatively unskilled activity, where we have these kind of generic management companies who primarily know how to do a small number of tasks, which is mowing grass. I'm being crude to speed things up, but you know what I'm driving at. And if we want but green infrastructure to really do what it can do and address the climate and ecological emergency, then our approach to management and maintenance needs to be much more skilled. And so that's a big part of the conversations we're having with those professional membership bodies, for example. So Landscape Institute, we're talking to them about how do we upskill and train management companies to better understand the biodiversity needs of features, including SUDS features, for example.
Yeah, the skills are absolutely key, and it leads into Suze's question, Gemma. When you launched the local authority green infrastructure training, which departments and teams will you be training?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
That is a great question, actually. I was thinking that.
Yeah, so it's a great question for me because it gives me a chance to say one of the biggest inhibitors of the progress we need to be making to really exploit the advantages of green infrastructure as an approach to planning and development is that it becomes a siloed approach. So one of the kind of key things to unlock that, and what we encourage through the training, is you need the right people there. And what you're saying is your question is a really good launch point for me to say we want as many different departments there as possible. So obviously the forward planning or policy team and the development managers is just the that has to be the starting point. And so at the very least we want a conversation between those two sides of the planning authority. But it's called local authority training and not planning authority training because we know that drainage and highways sit in other parts. Or it might be that if you're a two-tier authority, public health sits somewhere else. So let's invite them to the table. And the other bit of it, so it's not just kind of disciplines and different departments coming together. It's also about kind of decision-making and authority. So the training is split into a one hour seminar at the front of the day where you can have loads of people there and they get that real the story that I've just taken you through, and then we have a detailed workshop the rest of the day. So at that 1 hour at the beginning, we encourage you to get your chief executive, your corporate strategic objective makers so that people understand this isn't a planning issue. It shouldn't just be left to the planners. Or with the climate emergency, we're seeing local authorities now appoint a climate officer. How can you give that job to one person? Of course, it's key to get there. It's a great thing to have resource around it, but we need those decision makers and those kind of heads of departments there as well. So that's my answer to a really important question. Probably a little bit long, but thanks.
No, it's great. And one from Paul. Thank you very much for the informative presentation, Gemma. Building with Nature would clearly be of benefit to the planning process. Can you tell how this accreditation would benefit landscape and design officers so that it can help support discussion and not be seen in conflict to officer opinion and input? That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
So I suppose my short answer to reassuring you around that is that we've developed the standards to be achievable. So I would be very surprised if the standards weren't just another way of helping you to describe what you're looking for in terms of quality from your development. So because again they're high level principles, they see them as sitting above your local policy and your guidance locally. They sit above as a way of offering a kind of framework, parameters around quality. So we don't go into the detail that you'll go into around individual sites, or if you have, for example, a local nature recovery strategy in place and your ambitions are to restore ecological networks, or if you have sensitive sites around landscape character, we won't know any of that. But what we have is we have principles which then helpfully point applicants to that being important. So it should be a case of it's an overarching set of principles to support and add weight to what your landscape officers and other experts are saying locally.
Great. Almost there through three more questions. Can and how the Building with Nature standards work together with certification systems like LEED, BREEAM or DGNB? Is it possible to work in conjunction with those other standards?
Yeah, so we've had a look at that as well, because again, that would be frustrating if you were doubling up. So if you're following BREEAM for buildings, for example, there'll be a complementary aspect, but there isn't too much crossover, because green infrastructure in Building with Nature terms is all the natural and semi-natural features in and around the buildings. There's a slight kind of I suppose interface where we talk about integral features like living walls, green roofs, integral bird and bat boxes. So there will be some overlap, and of course green infrastructure can impact on the thermal enveloping or efficiency of buildings, which BREEAM's interested in, but they're quite distinct. BREEAM Communities is different in that it's a master planning accreditation which takes into account all aspects of the development, so there is an overlap. However, BREEAM Communities covers everything and is much more comprehensive than Building with Nature, which is just on the green infrastructure. So we do have schemes where they're pursuing accreditation for both, and they're not in conflict, and you can use the same evidence across. So we don't. It's not a formal read across like credits for BREEAM would equate to credits for Building with Nature, because, and the reason I say that, it's not to annoy people, it's just that Building with Nature is a qualitative set of metrics. So whereas BREEAM is quite kind of checklist based and tick box based, Building with Nature is much more about the professional judgment of the assessor. So for sure, evidence can read across with LEED and BREEAM and the others, but the way of evidencing your compliance with Building with Nature is much more qualitative, and it's based on the judgment of the assessor.
Yeah, that's great. We're not duplicating anything, or if you are doing something, you can utilize it on different standards at the same time. So thank you, Maria. Oana, for that question. Simon's asking, have you engaged with any Irish local authorities?
Great question, Simon. We've made some early stage inroads in Ireland. Our standards board chair, Alistair Scott, gave a presentation to the government in Northern Ireland. So we are at the moment it's a capacity issue that we're based on the mainland, and it would just be a case of starting to make inroads around training assessors in Northern Ireland and Ireland. What I would say though is that we developed the standards, we looked at policy and in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and we are sure that we looked across the world actually. So we didn't design the standards just to suit a kind of UK policy framing. Because they're design principles, we actually did an evidence and literature review from international sources. So I'm confident it can work in that context. And the other part of that is that we did have an approach from Fingal County Authority just this week actually. So it's you're psychic, obviously. So we're starting to talk about how we deliver local authority training there as well. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And then final question is from Taylor. Just to double check in terms of detailed design, the Building with Nature standards keeps the current guidance of the SUDS manual. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So C753 is still the current SUDS manual that we are referring to.
Awesome. We've
Cool.
still got a lot of people on the line, which is a credit to you, Gemma. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone's participation, all the questions, but most of all, thank you, Gemma, for a really, really fascinating insight. Just encourage everyone to go to your website, download,
thank
look
you.
at the standards. One question I've got for you in my mind is, I mean, if you're a consultant, and 60% of the audience were, if the consultants, they could approach you directly, couldn't they, to be assessed on their projects? It's not got to be the developer or the client.
No, so the way it would work is if you're interested in using the standards, just download them, have a look. That's the first thing. You can do that via the website. We just capture your details so we know who's using them, but that's it. They're free. In terms of accreditation, it would be a case of considering becoming an approved assessor yourself. So our training courses are advertised. There's more details about that on the website too. Or consider working with an approved assessor, and there's a register of approved assessors on the website as well. Now, if you're interested as a consultant in becoming an approved assessor, once you kind of you scope that out and you think you'd like to proceed, just get in touch with us. My colleague Sophie, who's there on the slide still, she would tell you all about the training, what the eligibility is, and I'll just quickly mention, we look for chartered members from the key membership bodies if possible, although if you have an equivalent professional experience and you're not chartered, then you know subject to a conversation with us, that isn't a kind of showstopper. So yeah.
Perfect. Lovely. Well, thank you so much again, Jim. I'll let you have a strong cup of tea. And
thank you. And should I put your last slide up, Peter?
Yeah, and then I'll hand over. Sorry, Ben, but I thought it was so engaging. It was worth just like capturing it, and rather than retrospectively having to answer all the questions that we didn't have time to go through. So
thank you so much, everybody, and thanks, Peter. It was really enjoyable. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, echoing what you said, Peter, really fantastic presentation, Gemma, and big thanks for joining us as a special guest today, and to you, Peter, for hosting the talk. If we haven't, what we do have is an action-packed schedule of virtual events coming up for you, and I hope you'll be able to join us for them. So our next water talk is tomorrow at 1 p.m, where we welcome Ian Titherington, Drainage Lead Officer at Cardiff Council. Among other things, Ian will be showcasing SUDS case studies and sharing tips on completing SAB applications. So please do join us for that one. The join links for all the upcoming events have been posted in the webinar chat. I will also be in touch next week with a recording of today's webinar. Please do remember to take a minute to complete the short survey that follows this webinar. Your feedback is important to us, and in return you'll receive an attendance certificate to use it for CPD. These certificates will be sent to you direct from GoToWebinar in 5 days' time. As always, don't forget to check out our upcoming training courses. You can find more details about them on our website. And finally, a big thank you for joining us today and hanging on as we answered all of those extra questions. Have a fantastic day, everyone.